Hey everyone, so today we're going to be exploring something that connects two things you're probably all very familiar with: sleeping and learning. But we're not just talking about studying before bed. We're going to dive deep into cutting edge research about how your brain discovers hidden patterns while you sleep. So, this research comes from two scientists at Rutgers University, Dr. Lerner and Dr. Gluck. They published a study in 2019 in a journal called Sleep Medicine Reviews, which is where sleep scientists publish their most important findings. Think about this for a moment. Have you ever gone to sleep struggling with a problem, then woken up with a solution? Or maybe you've learned something new, slept on it, and suddenly understood it better the next day? This research helps explain why that happens, but it turns out the story is a little more complex and interesting than we might have thought. So let me start off with a question for you. What do you think hidden regularities means? So, hidden regularities are patterns or rules that exist in information, but they're not obvious. You have to actually discover them. So, think of it like this. Imagine you're playing a video game where enemies appear on a screen and you think they're appearing randomly. But actually, there's a hidden pattern. Maybe every third enemy is always weak to fire attacks, but the game never tells you this. You actually have to figure it out yourself. The central question these researchers wanted to answer was, under what conditions does sleep help us discover these hidden patterns? So they focused specifically on four key areas: a systematic review, so this means that they looked at all the existing research on the topic, not just a few studies; associative relations, which is a fancy way of saying connections between things. So, for instance, if A connects to B and B connects to C, then maybe A connects to C as well. Implicit versus explicit detection. Implicit means you can use the pattern without consciously knowing it exists, versus explicit means you can actually tell someone what the rule is. And lastly, predicting when sleep effects occur. So they wanted to figure out when sleep helps and when it doesn't. So before we dive into what they found, we need to understand how scientists think sleep helps with learning. So there's two main theories. So the first theory is active system consolidation. So think of your brain like a filing system. During the day, all of your experiences get temporarily stored in a part of your brain known as the hippocampus. That's basically like your inbox. During sleep, especially during slow wave sleep, which is your deepest sleep, your brain replays these memories and transfers them to long-term storage in your cortex. That's like your permanent filing cabinet. But here's the interesting part. While your brain is replaying these memories, it can spot patterns and connections that you might have missed while you were awake. It's like having a super efficient office assistant who not only files your paperwork, but also notices important connections between different documents. The second theory, synaptic homeostasis, this one's about brain connections. So, synaptic refers to synapses, the connections between your brain cells. During the day, your brain forms tons of new connections as you learn. But if you kept all of these forever, your brain would become cluttered and inefficient. During sleep, your brain does some spring cleaning, basically. So it weakens or removes connections that aren't important, but keeps the strong, important ones. It's like cleaning up a messy desk. You throw away all the random scraps of paper you don't need, but you keep the really important documents. This makes the important patterns stand out more clearly. There's also a third model, known as the IOTA model, in which some scientists think both processes work together. So the name stands for Information Overlap to Abstract Model. Basically, your brain finds what different experiences have in common and creates general rules for them. So, now how did these scientists study this? They did what's called a systematic review, which is like being a detective who examines all the evidence. So they had a 4-step process. Step 1 was a literature search. They started with 22 well-known studies that they already knew about. Then, like following a trail of breadcrumbs, they looked at every study those papers referenced, and they kept doing this until they couldn't find any more relevant studies. Step 2 was their inclusion criteria. So they were really picky about what studies they wanted to include. The studies had to A, test humans, not just lab rats; B, use truly hidden patterns, so the participants could know that they should look for patterns; and C, focus on new learning, so not things people already knew. Step 3 was their exclusion criteria. So they did not include studies that A, only tested simple memory, like remembering a word list; B, used patterns that weren't really hidden; or C, relied on knowledge that people already had. And step 4 was classification. They organized all of the studies they looked at by A, whether people learn patterns consciously, explicitly, or unconsciously, implicitly, and B, whether the patterns involve timing, temporal, or not, stationary. They ended up analyzing dozens of studies involving thousands of participants. So the researchers looked at several different types of experiments. So looking at the main ones, the number reduction task, or NRT. So imagine you're given a series of math problems, but there's a hidden shortcut. You might work through several steps, but if you discover the pattern, you can skip to the answer immediately. It's kind of like finding a cheat code in a video game. Second were serial reaction time tasks, or SRTTs. Picture a game where dots appear in different locations on a screen and you have to press corresponding buttons as fast as possible. What you don't know is that the dots actually follow a hidden sequence, kind of like a secret pattern. Once you learn it, you can anticipate where the next dot's going to appear. Third were transitive inferences. So this is kind of like learning a social hierarchy. If you learn that Alice is more popular than Bob, and Bob is more popular than Charlie, can you figure out that Alice is more popular than Charlie? Your brain has to infer this relationship. Fourth were the weather prediction tasks. So you see a combination of cards and have to predict if it will be sunny or rainy. Each card has a different probability of predicting each weather outcome, but the rules are really complex and you have to learn them through trial and error. And then lastly, artificial grammar learning. So scientists created fake languages with made-up words that follow certain rules. You listen to sentences in this fake language, and then you later have to identify which new sentences follow the same rules. All of these tasks tested whether people can discover hidden patterns and whether sleep helps with this discovery. So here's where things get really interesting. The researchers discovered something that surprised them. The specific task you use matters way more than what kind of thinking you're trying to study. So let me explain it with an example. Imagine 3 different researchers all want to study pattern recognition. One uses a number task, one uses a visual task, and one uses a memory task. You might expect similar results since they're all studying pattern recognition, right? Well, it's wrong. What the researchers found is that studies using the exact same task would get very similar results, even when conducted by different research teams in different countries. But studies that claim to test the same mental process using different tasks would get completely different results. This is like discovering the brand of basketball you use affects your shooting percentage way more than how much you actually practice. It suggests that the specific details of how you test something might be more important than the general concept you're actually trying to study. So why does this matter? It means we can't make broad statements like sleep helps with pattern recognition. Instead, we have to be a lot more specific. Sleep helps with this type of pattern recognition task, but not that type. This finding challenges a lot of previous research that made sweeping claims about what sleep does for learning. The reality is much more nuanced and specific than scientists initially thought. So the key takeaway from this: when you see headlines like "Science proves sleep makes you smarter," be a little skeptical. The truth is usually a lot more complicated and depends on exactly what is being tested. So this is the really big discovery that could change how we think about sleep and learning. The researchers found a crucial difference between 2 types of hidden patterns. One of them was temporal rules, or time-based patterns. These are patterns where one event predicts another event that happens later in time. Think of it like this. If you notice that every time your teacher picks up a red pen, they're about to announce a quiz 5 minutes later. The red pen at time 1 predicts the quiz announcement at time 2. So examples from these researchers was in the number task, in which the second answer predicted what the 7th answer will be, and in the sequence task, where button press 1 predicted what button press 4 would be. The second pattern were stationary rules, or non-time-based patterns. So these are patterns based on relationships that don't involve timing. So, for example, learning that all triangular objects belong in category A, while all circular objects belong in category B. The shape determines the category, but timing isn't involved. So here's the shocking discovery. Sleep almost only helps with the explicit learning of temporal rules. So, to break it down a little bit, temporal rules and sleep are successful. So people could consciously identify and explain patterns, and it was consistently linked to slow wave sleep and worked across multiple different tasks. On the other hand, stationary rules in sleep led to failure. People rarely gained conscious awareness of the pattern after they slept, and even when effects were found, they were usually linked to REM sleep instead, and this was true regardless of which task was used. So, why is this important? This suggests that sleep isn't just generally good for learning patterns, it has a very specific preference for patterns that unfold over time. This is a much more precise and limited effect than most people, including many scientists, previously believed. So let me give you the numbers to show how strong this pattern actually was. So looking at explicit effects, which is the conscious pattern recognition, out of the 30 studies that tested explicit learning, only 14 found sleep helped. But here's the key. Almost all of the successful studies used temporal rules. So looking a little more specifically, the number reduction task, 3 out of 4 studies found sleep effects. In the serial reaction time task, 8 out of the 18 studies found sleep effects. And of the 11 studies that measured brain activity, 9 found connections to slow wave sleep. Looking at the implicit effects, or unconscious pattern use, it was found across all types of tasks. Both temporal and stationary rules showed these effects. It was much more consistent overall, and various sleep stages were involved. So, what does all of this tell us? It says that your sleeping brain seems to be really good at consciously figuring out if this, then that patterns that happen over time, but it struggles more to consciously learn this goes with that patterns that don't involve timing. However, your sleeping brain can unconsciously improve at using both types of patterns, so you might get better at a task without even realizing you learned anything. So this suggests that there might be different systems in your brain that handle different types of pattern learning during sleep. So this is where the researchers propose a really clever explanation for why sleep is so good at temporal patterns. They call it the temporal scaffolding hypothesis. So breaking it down step by step. First and foremost, the problem. Why can't we learn temporal patterns when we're awake? Your brain cells communicate using electrical signals. For 2 brain cells to form a strong connection, they need to be active at nearly the same time, within about 50 to 200 milliseconds of each other. This is called Hebbian learning after the scientist Donald Hebb. But many temporal patterns unfold over several seconds or even minutes. If event A happens now, and event B happens 10 seconds later, your brain cells can't easily connect them because too much time has passed. It's like trying to have a conversation with someone when there's a 10-second delay over the phone. The timing just doesn't really work. So the solution to this is compressed memory replay during sleep. During slow wave sleep, your brain doesn't just replay memories, it replays them and fast forward. Memories get replayed up to 20 times faster than they originally happened. So that 10-second gap between event A and event B, during sleep replay, it becomes a 0.5-second gap. So now your brain cells can connect them using normal Hebbian learning. And so the way this process kind of looks like is, when you're awake, you experience events but miss the temporal pattern because it's too slow. When you're asleep, your brain starts to replay the experience and fast forward. During this fast replay, the events that were separated by seconds are now close enough in time for your neurons to connect them. After you sleep, you wake up with new brain connections that represent the temporal pattern, and now you can consciously recognize the pattern you might have missed before. So, why does this all make sense? This helps to explain why sleep specifically helps with temporal patterns, but not stationary ones. Stationary patterns don't need this time compression trick because timing isn't the problem. They can be learned during wake periods if you actually pay attention to them. So not all sleep is created equal. Your brain goes through different stages of sleep, and each stage seems to do different things for learning. So looking at slow wave sleep, or SWS, this is your deepest sleep stage. You also might know it as deep sleep. So here's what happens. Your brain waves become really slow and synchronized, and this is when memory relay happens. And this is when the most consistent associations with explicit temporal rule learning take place. It's also linked to statistical learning, and this is also where temporal scaffolding probably occurs. So think of SWS as your brain's processing time, when it can work on complex problems without interference. REM sleep stands for rapid eye movement, so this is when you have your most vivid dreams. In this research, REM sleep helped with some procedural learning skills, like motor skills, was associated with the weather prediction task, connected to integrating new information with things you already know, and was less consistent for learning completely new patterns. So think of REM as your brain's creative time when it makes unusual connections. So other sleep features also include sleep spindles, which are brief bursts of brain activity that also correlated with learning, and non-REM transitions, and these are the moments when you transition between sleep stages. They also seem to play a role in it. So, what are the practical implications? This research suggests that getting good deep sleep, SWS, might be especially important when you're trying to learn patterns that unfold over time, like music or language or complex procedures. So, what does all of this mean for science and for you? So, theoretical implications. This research challenges some big assumptions scientists have previously made about sleep and learning. One, sleep effects are more specific than we thought. We can't just say, sleep helps learning. We need to specify what kind of learning and under what conditions. Broad claims about scrutiny. They need to be scrutinized. Headlines such as, sleep inspires insight, are probably oversimplified. The reality is much more specific and limited. And third, task details matter. The exact way you test something might be more important than the general concept you're studying. This is a big deal for how scientists design experiments. So looking into future research questions. 1. Testing the temporal scaffolding hypothesis directly. Scientists probably need to measure whether human brains actually do compressed replay like rat brains do. Filling in the gaps. Some types of learning, like grammar learning in adults, need more studies that test explicit rule awareness. Individual differences, so why do some people benefit more from sleep learning than others? And lastly, practical applications. How can we use this knowledge to improve education or training? So what does this mean for you? If you're learning something with tinier sequences like music, languages, or complex procedures, good sleep might be especially important. Don't expect sleep to magically solve all learning problems. It's more selective than that. Quality of sleep, especially deep sleep, might matter more than just quantity. And different types of learning might benefit from different sleep strategies. So looking at the key conclusions, let's wrap up the 5 most important takeaways from this research. So 1, task specificity matters most. Sleep effects depend on the exact details of what you're learning, not just the general type of thinking involved. This means we need to be much more precise when we talk about how sleep helps learning. 2, temporal rules have an advantage. Sleep preferentially helps you consciously discover patterns that involve timing and sequences. There's a much more specific effect than most people realize. 3rd, slow wave sleep is key. So for explicit temporal rule learning, deep sleep, SWS, consistently shows the strongest associations. This suggests that getting good quality deep sleep is crucial for certain types of learning. 4th, the temporal scaffolding theory. The idea that compressed memory replay allows your brain to connect events that are normally too far apart in time helps to provide an explanation for these findings. And lastly, number 5, science needs better theories. This research shows that broad general theories about sleep and memory aren't sufficient. We need more precise, specific frameworks that can predict when sleep will help and when it won't. So final thoughts, the relationship between sleep and learning is like a complex puzzle, and we're just beginning to understand how the pieces fit together. This research shows us that the picture is more intricate and specific than we initially thought, but also more scientifically fascinating. Your brain during sleep isn't just a passive storage system, it's an active pattern detection machine, but one with a very particular preferences and limitations. Understanding these preferences could help us optimize both sleep and learning in the future.